Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Connor Pritchett, and I work as the Assessment Customer First Manager at Pearson. And I'd like to welcome you all to this event, this live session with a Q&A, all surrounding centre policy. My fellow presenters are Mark Howlett, who's our Head of Assessment for General Qualifications, and David Casey, who's our Head of Assessment Strategy for General Qualifications. So in this session, we'll be giving an overview of the 2021 summer assessment window, and we'll be taking an in-depth look at the quality assurance process and specifically looking at centre policy. We'll then be finishing off the event with a Q&A section. Please expect for the event to finish at 5, but if we do get through enough questions, we may be finishing earlier, and depending on the sort of level of questions we've managed to get through. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to David now.
Wonderful. Thanks, Connor. Good afternoon, good evening, or perhaps good morning for some of you, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for coming today. Hopefully we're going to be able to answer some of your questions around centre policy. But just before I hand over to Mark Howlett to go through a bit more of that detail, just wanted to make sure that we've set the context for the series this year, and just some of the other general timelines that you may need to think about as you are producing centre policies. So just to sort of reiterate again, students will be receiving grades that are awarded and determined by their teachers this series. And I think it's really important to stress that pupils should only be assessed on what they have been taught. We do understand globally there's different levels of lost teaching and learning time that have taken place, and this system has been designed to be flexible enough to allow for that. So pupils are being assessed on what they have been taught. There is going to be no algorithm used or applied to sort of results this year, as there was sort of intended to be in 2020. So just to reiterate, there will be no algorithm used. But as teachers are determining those grades, it is important that a range of evidence is drawn upon when determining those grades. So this could be a few examples: the optional use of some of the questions that have been provided by exam boards, that could be made up by topic. They could be past papers as well. It could be full mock exams that have taken place that evidence what a learner, the performance level of an individual learner. Could be coursework or other forms of non-examined assessment, practicals, and any other work that has been completed as part of the pupil's course of study. So perhaps essays or in-class tests, as we say as well. There is a wealth of information already on our exam board website, our Pearson website, as well as on the JCQ website as well. The JCQ website is incredibly important to make sure that you've read and understood all of those key documents. And teachers will need to submit those grades to exam boards by the 18th of June. We will have a few more sessions about how you can submit those and what the submission system may look like as well, but that will follow in the coming months. And then just lastly to say that the results day for GCSE and A-level and some vocational qualifications are on the 10th and the 12th of August. So in the same week, which we know is not without challenges, but just sort of a bit of enough time to be able to prepare as well. There is a link that is hopefully just displaying on the screen there for you as well that should be available in the key documents. That is our key dates and timelines document. So I would suggest having a look at that if you can, but just also some of the key timelines on there are also displayed. So the 30th of deadline, the 30th of April is the next big deadline, which is the centre policy deadline, submitted via the CAT portal, which can be accessed via Edexcel online. If you are using another awarding organisation as well, they will have their systems where it could also be submitted, but it all feeds through into the same portal. Just on the right-hand side there, you should be able to see that's where you can access the link to get to our timeline that has got a bit more information and a bit more detail on it. You can begin submitting your grades from the 26th of May to the 18th of June via our portal. So that portal is going to look and feel quite similar to the one that we had last year, but we have listened to some of our customer feedback to make sure that we've made some improvements as well to the system. And then again, just the 10th and 12th of August. So some of the key documents that we will sort of focus in on a little bit more today do centre from the JCQ guidance document for UK qualifications and also our Pearson guidance for international qualifications. So just before we expand on some of that detail, there is another link to the JCQ document there that I would suggest accessing. But on Friday, the 26th of March is when the JCQ guidance on determining grades was released. That is the focal point, the main guide that UK centres and any centre delivering UK qualifications will need to follow as you arrive at grades for learners this summer. Can't stress enough how important that document is to have read and to sort of understand some of the key actions and roles and responsibilities that centres do have. On Thursday, the 1st of April, for our international qualifications, we released our Pearson guidance. And there are lots of similarities between the international guidance and the UK guidance, but there are some differences just based on the international qualifications and the options that are available to those centres this year as well. On top of reading those documents, make sure that you have downloaded the editable centre policy. We'll touch more on that as we go through the session today. The assessment record sheets, the head of department checklists, and the grade descriptors that are available. They are on top of the JCQ guidance document, 4 very important documents to make sure that you've interacted with, and your teachers, your heads of centres, your heads of department also know where those documents are. We have shared on our website as well a link for the top 10 important things to note from the JCQ document as well. So just trying to digest what we know is lots of information into one place. And just before I do hand over to Mark to talk through more detail of the centre policy, and we can answer some of your questions, and I can see there are some things coming in and some of the questions hopefully we'll be able to answer at the end of the session. But I just wanted to highlight our support again. So as well as these live sessions that we have got going on over the coming weeks for some of these general topics, but also for some subject-specific topics, we have got our 2021 support pages. That's got a wealth of information at sort of subject level as well. It will direct you to where some of our key pieces of support and information are. We've also got the Pearson Professional Development Academy, which has got some videos about centre policies and quality assurance, about grading. We've got more to come on appeals. Making sure that we've made that promise that in the coming weeks and months there will be more support to come around appeals. And then just sort of last 2 key pieces of information and channels of communication from us here at Pearson. Please do make sure that you're signed up for our fortnightly qualifications bulletin. That goes out to exams officers as well as other members of staff that have signed up for it. It does contain all the latest information, the latest updates that we can pass on to you. So they get sent every 2 weeks. The next edition is next week. On the alternate weeks, we will send out an exams officer update. And then lastly, the subject pages, which can be accessed via the Summer 2021 support pages, have got some brilliant resources on there and some really helpful subject guides. I do recommend that teachers are interacting with the individual subject guides. It is one document that has got a lot of the key links that you will need on a subject level, such as grade descriptors, grade exemplification, past exam materials, past grade boundaries, all of that is in one central place. So I would recommend that as teachers are working through the grading process as well. So that's just a quick sort of whistle stop 7 minutes on the general overview to make sure that we're all on the same sort of page and understanding the same context. But I will now hand over to Mark, who is just going to give us a bit more detail about quality assurance and the centre policy itself.
Thanks, David. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. So as David said, what I'm going to do is just take you through just a high-level summary again of the quality assurance process this summer, and then delve a little bit deeper into the centre policy itself and the mechanism in place to help support you in submitting those to us this summer. So to start off with, as I say, just a high-level summary of the overall quality assurance process that will be in place for all centres this summer. It's really important to stress that the purpose of the quality assurance process this summer is to be collaborative and to help support you as centres in deriving grades for your students, determining grades for your students that are fair, accurate and awarded consistently across the entire cohort. As with any quality assurance process, internal and external elements. So in terms of the external quality assurance that we will put in place, the first stage of that requires or will require all of the awarding organisations to review the centre policy submitted by each individual centre. So that is the first stage, and as Dave mentioned, we'll be talking through in a bit more detail about what that centre policy is and how to submit that in a moment. The second stage will not be required for all centres, but where we have reviewed a centre policy and we have concerns either about the level of detail provided in that policy, some of the approaches that are being taken that may not necessarily provide absolute confidence in the approach taken, we may put in place a virtual visit with centres. Now, as I said before, and really important to stress, the purpose of these visits is to be supportive, is to collaborate with you, help you to understand where we think potentially some areas of the policy need to be strengthened, where perhaps certain factors haven't been considered, and to support you in having a successful centre policy in place so that the decisions you make, the processes you put in place will help support the award of fair and accurate results to your students. The third and final stage then will require post-submission sampling. So once you've awarded your grades and you've submitted those to the awarding organisations, the third and final stage will see us review a sample of the evidence that you have used to award grades to your students. As again, it's really important to stress that further details about the precise process, the nature of that sampling and the process that you will need to follow to submit evidence to us and the range of evidence that we will require will be published very, very shortly. And of course, as ever, once that information is made available, we will provide additional support and guidance to help you do that as successfully as possible and as quickly as possible once your grades have been submitted. So, as David mentioned, the sort of purpose of today is to consider the centre policy. And the centre policy, if you like, is the kind of bedrock, the most important document of the process this summer. And the aim really is to make sure that, as far as possible, centres take a consistent approach to awarding grades to their students and to ensure that the grades that they award are fair, accurate and awarded consistently, both within the centre and across the country. Every single centre awarding grades this summer must complete a centre policy. What we have tried to do to be as helpful, and we are mindful of the burden that's been placed upon teachers and schools at this time, and with pupils returning to school and the focus on ensuring students are learning safely and are catching up with the time that they have missed, we've tried to pre-populate a template of a centre policy to ensure that, as far as possible, you can use that policy as we have provided it to you. Of course, centres don't have to use that that template. You may devise your own, but we would suggest that you review that template in the first instance. If you want to, you can adapt that policy, you can add to it, you can amend it. And again, depending on your own individual circumstances, you may need to remove certain elements depending on the types of approaches you'll be taking and the circumstances of your own individual students. Again, as David said, that policy will need to be submitted through the Centre Administration portal, and you can find a link to that through Edexcel Online. It's important to remember that you only need to submit one policy this year. So you'll submit that policy once through the CAP portal. You do not need to submit that policy to each individual awarding organisation. As mentioned, the purpose of this document is to summarise your approach to assessment and to the quality assuring of the grades that you will be awarding students this year. And it also includes details about how you will use evidence to support the grades for students that you're awarding grades to. And there's lots of information both in the template and also in the guidance document about the range of evidence that may be used and how to collate that evidence and use it to award grades to your students. In addition to the centre policy, and when submitting that through the Centre Administration portal, the head of centre will be required to complete a summary of the centre policy form. And again, if you go onto the JCQ website, you can see a template and details of what will be required within that summary centre policy form. In essence, we're asking you to confirm that you've followed the guidance, that you've read the guidance, and that for each of the important areas within the centre policy, you have appropriate arrangements in place to deliver your centre policy this summer. There are a couple of questions where you'll need to provide a brief summary of your approach, but that will draw upon the approach that you have set out in your overarching centre policy form. And as David said, and really important to remember and stress, that the submission of your centre policy must be completed by the 30th of April 2021. For those of you who have received a call already, we have been contacting centres to have an informal conversation about your centre policy and to ensure that you understand where all the key information is and where you need to go to get the guidance documents and the forms that need to be completed by the 30th of April. We've been contacting examinations officers. We are trying to get through those as quickly as we possibly can, and we'll make sure that we do that by the 30th of April. So as mentioned, the centre policies themselves need to be submitted through the Centre Administration portal, and you can access this via Edexcel Online. The key website, again, I think as David has mentioned already, is the JCQ website. And here you'll find a step-by-step guide on how to submit your centre policy, but also how to submit your centre policy summary form as well. And again, we've included the link here down below. You visit the JCQ website and head to 2021 arrangements. All of the key information, all of the key documents, guidance documents and templates can be found on that page. For international centres, it's a very similar process, and you'll need to upload your centre policy through the same portal, the Centre Administration portal, by the 30th of April. But we have provided specific guidance as well as an additional template for international centres on the Edexcel website. As I mentioned, every centre has to produce a centre policy this year, and we have produced a pre-populated template of that policy, and you can choose to adopt that if you wish, and that is provided on the JCQ website. As mentioned, you can amend that document. It's really important that you read through it, understand the obligations that are placed upon you as a centre, and the types of processes that you'll be required to follow this year. Of course, you can amend that document to reflect your own individual circumstances and the individual circumstances of your students. And similarly, we've provided guidance for international customers on how to produce a centre policy this year. There is a separate template for international centres, and again, that is available on our website. And again, it's really important that you review the templates that we've provided both on the JCQ website for UK qualifications and on the Edexcel website for international. We have provided a template for these policies. Please do read those in the first instance. It's important to remember that you don't have to use the template if you don't wish, but again, the template is there to support you and to be amended as you so wish and to reflect the individual circumstances of your centre. Okay, I think we're now moving on to the Q&A part of today, and I noticed there's been a number of questions. So Connor, I don't know if you want to pick up.
Hi, firstly, thank you for that, David and Mark. So we did get a few pre-submitted questions into us in advance of today's live session. So what I'll do is I'll read through a few of those and we'll answer those as we go. And then what we'll do, we'll switch over to some of the live questions we've been receiving as we've been speaking, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of those answered. So firstly, we had a pre-submitted question. If I'm doing both UK and international qualifications, do I need to submit one or two policies? I'm not sure if...
Thanks, Connor. I'll pick that one up. Yeah, absolutely. So for international centres offering our international qualifications, you will need to submit the international centre policy. For UK centres offering our international qualifications, you will need to submit the UK centre policy, but we will be in contact with UK centres offering those international qualifications for you to complete a very short additional online form to capture some of the differences between the UK approach and the international qualifications approach. It's important to stress that they are very small differences, but primarily focused around the types of evidence that are being used. And as I said, we will be in touch very, very shortly with details on how to complete that additional form.
Thank you for that, Mark. Next question. Do I need to attach percentage weightings to pieces of evidence that are going to be used within the centre policy?
I can pick this one up as well. So no is the short answer. You don't need to attach weightings around the individual pieces of evidence you will use. It's important to remember that the aim is to include evidence that assesses the student's ability across a reasonable range of subject content. And of course, reflecting as far as possible all of the assessment objectives within the qualification, as well as a reasonable range of content, depending on the range of content that students have been able to study over the course of the last 12, 18 months. It's also important to consider whether the evidence available is sufficient to support the judgment that is being made. So in terms of the grades you're awarding, do you have sufficient evidence that supports the level of grade that you want to award to those students this year?
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Mark. So another question we got in is, do I need to say if we are making training mandatory? So I can answer that one. So the answer is yes, where appropriate. So the aim is to ensure that all those involved in the process of dividing grades for students this summer are given the support and training they need to do this fairly, accurately and consistently. So another question we had in is, do I need to say all of the pieces of evidence we will be using for our cohort?
Yeah, I can pick this one up.
Sorry, go on, Dave.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of questions that are also in the Q&A around this one, so hopefully it answers some of those for you as well. So the key is to outline the types of evidence, and we would advise as far as possible that you take a consistent approach to the evidence that you use across your cohort. So it could be consistent use of mocks or consistent use of non-examined assessment, for instance. But of course, we recognise that there are differences. There are some nuances and exceptions that will exist, perhaps where some students were present for a particular assessment and not another, where some subjects have a slightly different qualification design that means that they will need to use a slightly different piece of evidence. So I think it's just to outline the key types of evidence that will be used, but we do recognise that there will be some differences based on subject or perhaps individual candidates and situations that were perhaps present at the time of a particular assessment.
Thank you for that, David. Another question we had in is, what happens if we don't use all the methods outlined in the centre policy?
I can take this one, Connor. So the short answer is it would really depend upon which methods have not been adhered to. So it's really important to remember that the purpose of the policy is to help you put in place robust and fair processes for all students. Awarding organisations will review these policies and approve them or potentially discuss any concerns. So if elements of the process are not then enacted, it may potentially undermine the overall approach that you have taken. But it would be important to reflect on which method you're not now using, and whether or not that method would then lead to potentially a change in the approach to outcomes you're awarding students this year.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Mark. And then another one we had in is, do I need to clarify which historical data we're using? So I think I know the answer to this. So yes, you should include what data you will use and how you use it. So historical data should only be used after you've awarded your grades to sense check the results you are submitting. So if outcomes are much higher than in previous years or much lower, the reason for it should be considered. So identify evidence for any recurring trends in the profile of performance at the centre over previous years, such as strong results for some subjects or specific student groups may be being sort of maybe of a higher ability than before or lower. So another question we have in, and this is probably more to do around sort of different situations centres might be facing. So our head of centre is leaving. What should we be doing? So I think that's specifically aimed at constructing the centre policy and signing off the form as well.
Sure, I can pick this one up, Connor. So obviously if your head of centre is leaving and before that the head of centre declaration and the centre policy are being submitted, then we would ask that an appropriate member of your senior leadership team signs that form instead.
Yeah, thank you. Another question. So I'm from a really small centre and I'm the only teacher. Is it okay not to use the head of department declaration?
So again, I'm happy to pick this up. Appreciate that there will be some very small centres with very small cohorts in some cases, and with very small departments. However, we would ask that all of the documentation that we require you to sign and submit with your evidence and with your grades is completed, even if that means that you are signing both the head of centre declaration and the head of department declaration as well.
Thank you, brilliant. So another question is, we don't have any NQTs. Do we still need to complete this section? So I can say that no, you don't, but you should indicate this in your centre policy. You should also think about any less experienced teachers who might need potentially additional support. Another question is, do I need to clarify the detail on what our internal standardisation process will look like?
Happy to pick this one up, yeah. Connor. So in short, yes, you will need to include the details of the standardisation process that you will undertake. I think here it's important to stress that the level of detail we're looking for here is the overarching processes you will put in place, and not the subject by subject individual approaches that you will take. So we're looking for a high level summary here of the types of activities you will put in place, and this could include, but is not exclusive to, things like holding internal standardisation meetings across departments with all teachers to review evidence, and the types of evidence you'll submit. It could include sessions you may hold with teachers around understanding the grade descriptors and the grading exemplification that's been provided by boards to ensure that they will apply those consistently. But as I say, we're not looking for a subject by subject detailed account of your approach there.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. So another question, do we need to retain all of the evidence that teachers have? I can answer that, yep. Short answer, the answer is yes. Another question, should what should we do if our head of centre has a student within the school? Isn't this a conflict of interest?
Yeah, I can take this one. I don't feel like I've been quick enough to get myself off mute, and others have been getting there first. So absolutely, it would be a conflict of interest. In those situations, we would advise that sort of normal procedures are followed. It should be declared that there is this conflict of interest, and you should, where possible, have a counter-signatory just to verify that the policy has been followed appropriately, that all of the grades that are awarded are fair and sort of free from bias where possible. So, yeah, normal procedures, and you need to make sure that you build in some counter-signatories and quality checks in that instance.
Thanks, David. I would nearly come to the end of our pre-submitted. The final two questions are, first one is, we don't have any private candidates. Do we still need to include this within our centre policy? I can take that one. No, you don't. So if you don't have any private candidates, you can leave that. And then the final question is, we're not going to have enough staff members on results day. What should we do?
Yeah, I can take that one as well. It's hard for us as an exam board to fully make a recommendation on this, but I know it is something that is specifically mentioned in the centre policy itself. So we would just sort of urge you to plan as far in advance as possible on for results day, whether it's if you can plan any extra cover to support for it. It might also be that you link with another local centre, or depending on circumstances, you might operate a virtual results day to support with that. But I think a harder one for us to answer, but there are a few recommendations that we could make with it.
Excellent, thank you for that. So I'm just looking through our live Q&A questions that have been submitted through as we've been speaking and as we've been going through our pre-submitted. So I'll just pick out one or two as I go through and put those out towards everyone. So we've got one question. So when a centre policy is already in action as assessments are underway, how does a virtual centre visit after the 30th of April help ensure fairness? Could a centre be told, for example, that assessments pupils have already undertaken are now or completed are now not valid?
Yeah, I can answer this one, Connor. So I think, as I said before, the purpose of those visits is to be collaborative and supportive. We envisage that it will be for a small number of centres that we would need to or be required to put in place a virtual visit to discuss their arrangements. In terms of how far through the process for determining grades for your students are, again, it will depend on the circumstances and the approach that you're taking as to whether or not we would be required to talk to you about the detail around the specific nature of the types of evidence you're using or the circumstances under which they're being produced. We have provided details of the types of evidence that would be acceptable, but also how centres should reflect on that evidence and make sure that they're confident that the evidence that's being used is fair, is accurate, is reliable. And one of the key things to remember is the authenticity of that evidence as well. So it's difficult to imagine us having a conversation with a centre specifically about evidence that may already be produced and having that level of detail. It would more likely be about the processes you're following and the way in which you would use that evidence to determine the grade.
Thanks for that, Mark. So quite a simple question is how do I sort of gain contact with Pearson for support? So quite easily, if you go through our website, so our Pearson's qualifications website, click on support, and you'll be able to get in touch with our customer services team who will be able to assist if you do need any support. Another question is, how long do we have to wait to hear from Pearson about any potential issues about our centre policy? Do we have a timeline or anything like that?
Yeah, so I can answer this. So we are commencing reviewing the policies as they are coming in. We've already received a number of policies. The deadline is obviously the 30th of April. it is our intention, and kind of speaking to the point that was raised just a moment ago, to make sure that we review those policies as quickly as possible, whilst ensuring that we review them thoroughly and robustly. Obviously, we want to ensure that if we do need to speak to centres, that we have that conversation as quickly as possible, so that the outcomes of that conversation can be enacted, and give centres sufficient time to put additional processes in place, or to change any processes they have in place well ahead of the 18th of June centre assessed grade submission deadline.
Thanks for that, Mark. Just going through some of the other submitted questions. So we have had a question in about BTEC and Q tags, but I should just confirm this session is predominantly focusing on our general qualifications. So if you do have any questions, please do get in touch with our customer services department, and they'll put you through to our vocational assessment teams who will be able to help answer. So I'm just going through and just seeing what we have.
I think there's one that I will just pick up on, Connor. There's a couple of questions coming in around sort of student declaration forms and authenticity sheets for them to sign, and whether there are plans for us to release one or JCQ to release one. At the moment, there are no plans. We'll take that feedback back. But I think it's going to depend on the individual centre and the approach that is being taken as to sort of confirming the level that is needed for the sort of the student authenticity. And I think the difference that I'm pulling out is for international qualifications. If an unseen assessment is being used in quite high control environments, a centre should be more secure that that is the student's sort of own work. So there'll be less control around that. However, we've been speaking to some schools that have sort of the way that they are involving student agency in the decisions and knowing what is going forward in their basket of evidence, are scheduling one-to-one meetings perhaps with candidates to say this is what's being included in your basket of evidence. Some of them have got reports that are showing students what is involved in their basket of evidence. So at the moment, I guess what I'm saying is there is no individual form. It is at the centre's discretion as part of their approach that they take as to how they approach that. But it might just depend on some of the levels of control existing around the assessments as well.
Thank you for that, David.
Connor, just noticed there's been a few questions about evidence and the consistency and how far the same evidence needs to be used across cohorts. So I think it's worth clarifying that, of course, what we have recommended through the guidance is that as far as possible, within a cohort or within a subject, you attempt to use the same evidence, the same range of evidence for your class as is possible. Obviously, one of the reasons for that is it will help to ensure the consistency in the outcomes that you're awarding and the approach you've taken, so that students can be confident that they have been awarded grades in a similar fashion to those of their peers. Of course, and this has come up in the questions throughout the session, there will be individual circumstances where, for instance, a student wasn't able to attend a particular assessment, wasn't able to complete a particular assessment. They may have been unwell when the particular piece of content that assessment was assessing, they were unwell at the time. So we do accept that there will be nuances and differences. I think the overarching aim is to, where there are differences, to make sure that those students' grades are based on the evidence you have available for them. And that's a key principle for this summer, is that the grades you are awarding must reflect the evidence you have for an individual student and for the students within the class. So if certain students don't have a particular piece of evidence available, do they have other forms of evidence that may help support the grade that you wish to award them?
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Mark. Just another question I've seen come in is, will it need to be evident on students' work that standardisation has taken place, e.g. annotations on the work itself, or will it be enough to record the process which has taken place?
I can pick this one up, I think. So I think the question is in terms of the evidence and what would need to be supplied, would an annotated version of that particular piece of evidence be sufficient? So I think there's two things to this. One is that in the centre policy, again, you will have outlined the approach you will have taken. And that is the first thing that the awarding organisations will review. When it comes to the third and final stage of our quality assurance process, so that post-submission of grades, when we are looking at evidence, what we'll be looking to see is firstly that the grades you have awarded are commensurate to the evidence that you've supplied to us, and secondly that the evidence you've used is in support of the centre policy that you put together. So if you've said you'll use particular types of evidence, we'll be looking to ensure that you've included those pieces of evidence within the evidence you submit to us.
Thanks for that, Mark. And we've got another question is, so we only have 1 year of historic data. Can we place any reliance on it? So I could probably answer this one. So I think historic data has its place. It shouldn't be a sole factor in determining grades. But it can be used as an aid to make sure you're on the right lines. If you've got a limited data set, I'd say you probably should be using more of your current evidence that you've been gathering from your candidates.
Yeah, Connor, it's probably worth stressing, because again, I think there's been a couple of questions on this, that the purpose of the historical data is to be a mechanism for you to just review the grades that you wish to submit on behalf of your students. It's not there to be the guide and to say that your results have to be in line with any results that you've achieved historically. But to put it into context, what we're expecting centres to do is to reflect on the outcomes and say that if outcomes are significantly higher or significantly lower indeed, what might be the reason for that? And if there are reasons for it, are those reflected in the evidence that you have for your individual students? And again, it comes back to this principle that I just outlined. The grades you're awarding this student have to be supported by the evidence. And therefore, if you have the evidence to support those grades, whether they be higher or lower than a previous cohort, that's absolutely fine. But it is there to help support you as a reflective tool on the grades you are submitting to your students, and as a final check to make sure that you've got the evidence you need to support those grades.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Mark. So another question is, so for example, if OCR is my QA board, then I have to access the CAP portal via their website, then, and not via Pearson's, for example.
Yeah, I can take this one, Connor. So no, you can submit your policy through Edexcel Online. The Centre Administration Portal is accessible to all boards, and so OCR will be able to see your policy just as we would be able to see any policy submitted through OCR system, or indeed AQAs or WJECs.
Brilliant, thank you. Another one, I'm an exams officer. Can I submit the centre policy summary on behalf of the head of centre?
I'll answer that one. Absolutely, yes, you could, but you could submit it on behalf of the head of centre, and it tends to be that exams officers are the roles within the school that have the appropriate level of access to be able to submit it through Edexcel Online. But what I would just say is that before submitting it, please make sure that it's got the head of centre sign off, and all appropriate checks have taken place before you do submit it to the awarding organisations.
Thank you. I've one common question that's coming up is, are schools expected to share the centre policy with students and parents?
Yeah, I can pick this one up. So there's no requirement for you to share that. However, I think it's important to remember that the centre policy sets out how you are going to award grades in a fair and consistent fashion to your students. And it might be that you choose to share that with parents and with students to ensure that they have complete visibility and to ensure that should students wish to appeal, they fully understand the process and the mechanisms that you put in place to award grades to them this year.
Thank you. Just going through a few repeated questions. So I'm just trying to find one that's new.
Connor, just whilst you're looking, there's a couple of questions come up. I use the word significant and someone's asked me to define that. I think the reason why I used that was just as an illustration of how you may choose to reflect on the data. Of course, if your historical outcomes are exactly the same as the grades you're looking to award this year, it's still there to reflect on the evidence that you are using to support those grades. So you will know what grades you're awarding, how they align to previous cohorts, and whether or not you have the evidence in place to support the grades. And then just finally, I saw a question came in about different subjects within a centre want to use slightly different evidence. Again, that's absolutely fine. We would expect that given that different subjects operate in different ways. They have different skills. Some subjects will have more practical elements. They may have NEA included in them. Other subjects may be more sort of traditionally exam-based. So we would expect different subjects to have a slightly different approach. The important thing is in your centre policy that you detail all of the approaches that are going to be taken. So if you are using NEA, you need to include that you'll be using NEA where appropriate. If you're using external assessments or past external assessments, you would need to include that in your centre policy as well.
Thanks, Mark. We've got one question in. Will private candidates be put to the same rank order with existing candidates?
So
I'm happy to answer this one.
Okay, go on, Dave.
Well,
sorry. Over to you.
Sorry,
yeah,
so there
so
won't
I think
be any...
the keyword just to pull out of that is rank order. There is no rank order that is mandated by exam boards this year. Private candidates have the same access to all of the available options for determining grades this year. So they don't need to be included in any, there is no rank order to be included in. It will just be the grade that will be submitted for the private candidate.
Thank you for that. So one question is, so high-level control is exam-style control. Can you define what medium-level control is?
Yeah, I can take this. So, I mean, there isn't a sort of firm definition of this, but I think if we think about this on a sliding scale, so high-level controls, absolutely, as you say, would be in a kind of traditional exam-type environment, students not being able to access any additional information, not being able to talk to each other and being spaced sufficiently away from each other to prevent any kind of plagiarism. At the bottom end of the scale, under low control, that may be that students have got access to all of their teaching and learning resources, that they are doing it perhaps without any supervision whatsoever. Obviously between that and so your kind of medium control, you would expect students to perhaps maybe have access to some limited information to support them in the assessment. Some of the controls around supervision may be relaxed, so it may be sat in class and students may be able to ask teachers questions, or it may not be under strict silence as you would expect in an exam condition.
Thank you for that, Mark. Another question is, should teachers be avoiding grading, in quotes, individual pieces of evidence?
Yeah, I can pick this one up. So I think as the guidance sets out, the aim here is not to grade each individual piece of evidence, and teachers will need to form a holistic judgment about the grade that they are awarding their students this year. So of course, what you can use is the grade descriptors, the grading exemplification that we have provided, but it's important that you don't attempt to grade each individual piece of work. That may not be possible for certain pieces of work anyway, internal classwork, any work that's been sat that isn't or hasn't been produced by the awarding organisations, but that you use all of the accumulated evidence to match that in a holistic way to those grade descriptors and to the grading exemplification.
Thank you for that, Mark. So another question is the summary form on the JCQ CAP website, can it be completed when you upload your centre policy?
Yes, it can. Yeah, very simple one.
Thanks. Another question is, this has come up twice. So we've been online for over a year. We've conducted online assessments through Zoom, where the assessment is supervised throughout and visible with mics on. Is this quote unquote high level or medium level control?
Thanks, Connor. So yeah, I think again the question here is not that we will not accept evidence that hasn't been produced under high controls. It's really important to stress that we will accept a range of evidence. The key part of this is that as a centre, you're able to authenticate that evidence as the student's own, and you have confidence that it reflects the student's ability. Now, the example I think from the question that's just come in around sort of almost remote proctoring and having students sit assessments online with some measure of supervision, that kind of approach is absolutely acceptable. That's absolutely fine.
Thanks, Mark. And then, so are we presuming data for legacy courses should not be considered? Question mark.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the reasons why we have stressed that kind of 2017 to 2019 period is obviously for the majority of qualifications that reflects performance by students in the reformed qualifications, many of which were first assessed in 2017.
Thank you. And another question is, different subjects in our centre want to use different evidence. Is this okay as long as the evidence is consistent within that subject?
Yeah, so again, I think we had a similar question to this earlier on. So absolutely, we would expect, as I said before, different subjects to have slightly different approaches in terms of the evidence they're using, and that will reflect the nature of the subject, the type of evidence that's typically produced within it. And as I say, it could include things like practicals, coursework, NEA, or it could include more traditional exam-style evidence. But again, that would reflect the nature of the subject.
And can we collect pupils' signatures for the declaration of authenticity electronically?
Sorry, Connor, I don't know if I lost connection there, but I missed that question. So,
no problem. It's can we collect pupils' signature for the declaration of authenticity electronically?
Yes, that's absolutely fine.
So we're getting to the end, and I think we're getting a few repeat questions, and I'm not sure if David, Mark, you want to take a look and see if you can pick any out as well.
Yeah, there's just a couple of come through when we were talking about, do you need to grade each individual piece of evidence? And obviously the response there was that no, you don't, but you do need to be using all of that evidence to make a holistic judgment. What that doesn't exclude you from doing is, of course, applying a grade to an individual piece of work. And the questions I think have been coming through around students who perhaps have completed an exam, or a past paper where perhaps we've got historical grade boundaries, it's absolutely fine to grade those papers. But as I say, what we'd be looking for you to do is to then bring all of that evidence together to award a grade holistically, rather than just applying grades to individual pieces of evidence. Because of course, students may perform differently in one piece of evidence versus another, and it's important to balance those together in order to form an overall grade.
Thanks for that, Mark. So I believe we may have already answered this, but I'm not sure if I'm missing something here. So the question is, if we only have to submit one policy, how will that work with the 5 options on the IGCSE one and the unseen tests? So the question goes on, your policy needs to show which options you'll be using. If you are using a mixture of options, this will need to be reflected. How will this work for GCSE subjects where the IGCSE 5 options does not appear relevant?
Thanks, Connor. So I think the question itself is asking sort of how do we know what options you're taking and how do we reflect that? So for international centres, we are asking you to indicate which options you will be following. You can use a mixture of those approaches. You don't have to select just one. And you may choose to use, as we have said, the unseen materials, or you may wish to use your own internal assessments. You may wish to use the 2 of those things combined in order to derive a grade, and that's absolutely fine. What you just need to do is make sure that you indicate that on your centre policy.
Brilliant, thanks, Mark. I think we're near the end of the session. We've got a few questions, and I think if we just get through 1 or 2 more, and I think we might have to wrap up there. But we've got one through. To what extent can we share the content of assessments?
That's a really good question. It was such a good question. I saw it came through 3 times. So hopefully we can give a good answer to this. So you may be aware that we have published some additional assessment materials to support teachers in deriving grades or determining grades for your students this year. It's important to stress that these are not compulsory. You do not have to use these. They are there to support you should you so wish. What we have also done, and we have been required to do so, is to publish the questions within those assessments and make those publicly available. So the questions are publicly available. The mark schemes, along with all of the supporting guidance around marking and exemplification of those questions, has not been. So we would advise that if you are assessing your students, that you don't share assessments with them beforehand. However, the additional assessment materials are made publicly available and available on our website.
Amazing, thank you for that, Mark. So we're just about to reach 5 o'clock, which was the scheduled end time. I think we have got through quite a range of questions, so thank you to yourself, Mark, and David for answering those. And is there any other sort of last notes if either of you want to say?
Connor, just one really important thing, just it's come up as a question at the last minute, is should we be sharing grades with students? So there's a really important distinction to be made, is that yes, you should inform students of the evidence you are using to support the grades, but you should not be telling them what grades you will be submitting on their behalf this summer. So just a really important distinction to make there, that it's fine to tell them what evidence you'll be including to arrive at the grade, but not to confirm to them the grade that you will be awarding on that basis.
Thank you for that, Mark.